Because you work with boomers.
Yeah, it's like it's before my time.
Facebook's before your time. Well,
not technically, but like no one might.
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different social media platforms. Facebook, I mean, there were some before Facebook, and Facebook is the big deal. But Facebook, is a great place for the marketplace, advertising. I mean, it's an advertising company, really. Anyway. But you can organize events on it pretty well. Yeah, you can get your insurrections organized on it. Yeah.
I gotta explain to them, like, I don't know that. It's like it's formed to me. It's like I don't know what are social media like that.
Yeah, like old heads don't know anything about like Snapchat or TikTok or anything like that. Yeah, MySpace.
It's just as foreign to me as MySpace. I have no idea. I wish I was on MySpace.
Not really. But the thing with MySpace, the big thing with MySpace is it was like actually some bands that were like discovered on MySpace, because MySpace was really a site for bands and music and art people to like put their stuff out there and kind of get discovered. Like, yeah, well, YouTube actually preceded MySpace, but it wasn't. YouTube's never been like a social media kind of thing, I mean, you kind of go viral on YouTube, but you got to have a way to spread that information. I'm pretty certain that Justin Bieber was kind of discovered on MySpace.
Yeah.
Like he posted some stuff and then.
His manager found him at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. So, but besides Justin Bieber, other people too, and a lot of people. So like people you've seen on like American Idol and stuff, they were kind of like encouraged through MySpace. But the thing is, anyone can make a MySpace. So how it really worked was if you weren't a band or something, you just created a MySpace. You kind of sort of at the beginning had to pretend like you had a band, but what does it mean to have a band? You can just be like, I'm a person. I'm tone deaf, but I got a band, whatever. So people used it as a personal social media thing because you can post pictures and music and stuff like that. Okay, let's see. If you're remote, let me make sure I got the right screen here. Yeah, that's good. In the folder for this week, there's a thing that says plan for the week, and the plan for the week has a link in it. I want to show this video real quick. It's like 4 minutes. And so it's best to watch this like offline. Down toward the bottom for today, there's a link that says watch these 2 videos. One says what are coral reefs and what's their purpose. That's the one I'm going to show right here in class right now, and it's like about 4 minutes long. I got to switch to a different thing on this. There we go. Looks like there's a 15-second ad that we don't have to watch. Like school doesn't make us watch the ads.
Coral reefs are like the rainforests of the sea, and like those here on land, they're being destroyed. But why should you care? Howdy, friends under the sea and not. Trace here for D News. When you picture coral, you probably see it like this, right? But coral aren't just colorful rocks. Tiny living things live in there. Those rocks are actually the skeletons of polyps, which look like this. Polyps constantly secrete calcium carbonate to build these protective skeletons. This is why people say that coral reefs are living, not because the calcium structures are alive, but because the polyps live inside those little structures, like a turtle in a shell, only popping out to feed or occasionally to fight with one another. Coral are related to jellyfish and sea anemones and are not mobile animals. Instead, they anchor and they live their whole lives in one place. Polyps can be as small as the head of a pin or as large as a foot across, and while some grow in groups, others are solitary. The very colors in their bodies come from symbiotic algae that live inside of the polyps. As they grow and die, more coral will grow on top of them. And over millions of years, coral pile together to form giant coral reefs that create the basis for 25% of all ocean life, even though they're only 0.1% of the area of the ocean. Again, rainforest of the sea. Get it? Coral appeared in the fossil record 400 million years ago. As the polyps grew through their life cycle, the calcium carbonate they secreted would sometimes merge with secretions of other polyps around them. They do that still, it forms shapes like tables or pillars or spiral wires or staghorns or brain coral. They're all rigid structures with living polyps, but they live in different places and require different conditions. These shapes are affected by the weather, currents, and of course, human and large animal activity. When coral like this band together, they're called reef-building coral, and they form some of the most diverse ecosystems on our planet. If you're like me, then you grew up hearing that the reefs were important, but I was never sure why. After researching, though, I get it. I could list all of the animals living in a coral reef in this episode, but it would never end. There are literally millions of species that exist in, on, and around coral reefs. These structures have been around for millions of years, so it's safe to say there are likely fish, crustaceans, and algae that evolved to live on those reefs and nowhere else, just like insects, mammals, and birds in the Amazon. It's mind-boggling. And that's not all they do. Coral also control how much carbon dioxide is in the ocean. They take carbon dioxide out of the water, and they use it to build their calcium carbonate skeletons. Without coral, the amount of CO2 in the water would affect the whole planet. But luckily, they trap it in stone for us all. And if housing species looking awesome and saving the planet wasn't enough, coral reefs alter how the ocean affects us on the shore. The reefs build up over millions of years and can survive in warm, shallow water as well as colder, deeper water. Reefs can span massive areas and undulate like mountain ranges. They build themselves to withstand typhoons, hurricanes, and other tropical storms, and therefore buffer the shore against those wave storms and floods. These tiny animals evolved long before we did, and their existence in areas like Australia and Florida can prevent loss of life, property damage, and erosion by tempering that rushing ocean. Today, coral are in trouble. Coral are sensitive to water temperature, so global warming and climate change is bad. Ocean acidification, ecotourism, and commercial overfishing are all beginning to kill off these tiny animals. In fact, when the animal is stressed, they release that symbiotic, colorful algae into the water, and then they turn white and die. It's called blanching. Bad. It's important to think of coral not as pretty rocks, but as living things like a dog or an elephant. A new 42-year study of coral has found that we've only got about a sixth of the coral left on our planet, with the Caribbean losing 50% of their coral since 1970. But all hope is not lost. According to the study, the parrotfish might be the coral savior. Where parrotfish live, coral are thriving. So new sanctions on the protection of parrotfish are being considered. With a bit of effort, we can help these little animals continue another 400 million years or more, and it helps to know them a little better, right? Tell us in the comments what you think and subscribe. Also, if you're really into the news of the day.
All right, that's enough of that. Let's get rid of that thing. That doesn't really matter. All right, then in the folder, there's a thing that says Life of Coral, and I'm going to download that so we can view it. Quit this thing. I don't know if you ever had 100 messages in Schoology. Like, I just don't delete them. But once you get up to 100, it turns into a dot. Did you know that? I don't know if you, now you do. So it was like 98, 99, dot. So forever it'll just be a dot. That doesn't mean I haven't read 100. That doesn't mean I haven't read the 100. It's just, you know, well, sometimes I read them but don't do anything, so it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. Just stay like that. All right, so there's coral out in the ocean, but we keep coral in aquariums. This is actually coral in an aquarium, and the deal with coral in aquariums is we've actually collected the most colorful, unique varieties of coral that exist in the ocean. Most coral is actually usually like a brown or a pink color. It's not very exciting looking. The coral exists really in the tropical regions of the Earth, between the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, between about 20 degrees north and south latitude. So the tropical zone's that green zone, and then coral reefs are only around the yellow areas. And around the United States, the only coral reefs that we have that are tropical coral reefs are just down in, well, along the Florida Keys, there's a small one, the U.S. Virgin Islands, around Hawaii, and then out in the Pacific, around Guam, the Mariana Islands, American Samoa, which are also U.S. territories, and around Puerto Rico. But for the continental United States, like the American 50 states, the only states that really have tropical coral reefs are Hawaii and Florida. That's it. The biggest reef that you know about is the Great Barrier Reef. So off the northeast coast of Australia, there's a very, very large reef, and it's called a barrier reef because it offers it's in a way like a barrier or a protective structure for the shore or the coast, but it's quite a ways offshore. And it's not one big, huge continuous reef, but all these gray areas are big sets of coral. For the United States, so down in the Bahamas is a country, but Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, and then off the coast of Florida, and then Hawaii itself. So those are the places where we've got some coral. So here's an interesting thing to know about Florida. I think I may have mentioned this before, and it's a very important thing to know. The entire state of Florida, the huge peninsula of Florida, that whole peninsula was once a coral reef. The entire state. It was a colossal, huge reef. But the deal is that you know that ocean plates move up and down, they go side to side. This was completely submerged. All of Florida was underwater, and Florida got lifted up, and all that coral died. After the state of Florida got lifted up, the Florida Keys, which is the island chain that extends off Florida, the Keys Islands, those then became the remaining surviving reef. But then the Keys got lifted up, and now the Keys, which are a chain of islands, really used to be a chain of coral, that got lifted up, and now the only existing reefs are these very small boxes that are in the yellow area. The biggest one is Kerry's Reef, which is off of Key Largo. Key Largo is the largest of the keys. Like Largo literally means to be large or long, and Kerry's Reef is off that. There's other small reefs, but the quantity of reefs that still exist off of Florida is very, very tiny. So here's to show you like the relationships between depths. When sea level was about 125 meters lower, Florida's shore was significantly larger as compared to what it is today. This is Florida's shoreline today. If ocean levels were to rise 5 meters, which is only 15 feet, then this would be Florida's coast. So in other words, all the part of Florida, like down here in the Everglades and the southern tip of Florida and Florida Keys, and all along the East Coast, and actually all of Jacksonville, which is the largest city in Florida, and then over here on the western shore, if the ocean rose 15 feet, all of that would be underwater, all of it. In other words, there's everything that's down here in Florida. There's not a bit of land that's more than 15 feet above sea level. Florida is very, very, very close to being underwater. So that's it puts Florida in a very precarious situation. If sea levels were to rise 50 meters, which is 150 feet, these are the only points in Florida that are 150 feet above sea level. 150 feet is nothing. Like when you go from 4th Street up to the high school, that's 600 feet. Like driving the front hill is 600 feet. If water in Florida were to go up 150 feet, which is only, a third that height, there'd just be these little bits of islands, and all the rest of Florida's gone. There's a little bit of Florida up here in the Panhandle, but that's pretty much Alabama. Around Hawaii, reefs exist all around all of the islands, and both in shallow water and deep water. These are pictures of like different sharks and fish and whatnot that exist in Hawaii. We keep some of these fish in our aquariums here at school. We have like a orange surgeon fish. It's also called a lieutenant tang in the 550-gallon tank. His name's Dan because he's a Lieutenant Tang, like Lieutenant Dan on Forrest Gump. Yeah. We have pyramid butterflies in some of our tanks. I don't know. We have yellow tangs, and there's a bunch of sharks and rays and stuff. So the different kinds of reefs. There are reefs that are very, very close to shore sometimes. There are a couple places in Hawaii where you can wade from shore out a short distance, sometimes even just like 50 feet in very shallow water, just a couple feet deeper water. and see inner reefs that are very, very close to shore. But most reefs are offshore at some distance. And then Finding Nemo, they talk about the drop off. That drop off is where the fore reef is. So like kind of like where the abyss drops off. Because coral require quite a bit of light. In our aquariums, there are some general types of coral. And so next week, I'm going to have you propagate coral, cut coral, and work with it to mount pieces in order to get it ready for sale. Because we cut the pieces up in our aquariums. A lot of our colonies have grown to be big, and you'll see like what it feels like. So some coral doesn't build skeleton at all. One common coral that's kind of a pink color is this coral called a Kenya tree coral, because it's similar to some trees that actually grow in the country of Kenya, but has nothing to do with that. And this is a soft coral that automatically propagates. So what happens is the coral gets big, it drops these little branches off, the branches float around and land somewhere and stick on things. Some other coral we have include these things called mushroom coral. These are individual single animals that form these little round shapes, and they can vary in color and size. They're usually about the size of a quarter or so. We've got them in a bunch of different varieties and sizes. But the reef building coral, especially the stuff when we talked about calcium in the ocean, most coral builds solid skeleton, and that solid skeleton is built by the coral and provides home for the coral, and oftentimes is trying to increase the amount of surface area to get the amount of colonies to grow on it to be as large as possible for life with the smallest amount of physical structure. And so like this coral on the right hand side, the big one, it's kind of like a tan color, brownish. That's very typical. But when we collect coral for use in aquariums, we're not looking for the boring brown stuff. We want stuff with bright colors and stuff. Like this has purple tips or blue tips. We've got some of this Acropora coral, and it's usually pretty highly prized and kind of expensive in the hobby. For this Acropora coral, this one's not super exciting, but each of the individual pieces that come off, you can get, 50 to $100 a piece for each of those little pieces there. Like the total value of the coral that we have in our aquariums that you see from the hallway, it easily exceeds $100,000 or more. Like it's just a lot of money worth of coral. But it's all grown from fragments. So this is a picture of a coral in one of our aquariums. It grows in a different fashion called a bird's nest coral. There's all these little spiky bits. The new growth is the bright white tips, and it grows as a solid structure. And when we propagate it, all you do is take a pair of bone cutters and clip a little piece off and super glue it onto some substrate. I'll show you how that works next week. And then you let it grow out. Some of our coral, especially in the bottom of the 550-gallon tank, is flat like this. This is a Montipora Capricornus, or they call it Monticap. And we've got it in brown, red, orange, purple, and we got like this blue one with yellow spots. And it's kind of like a potato chip. You can snap it off. It's about as hard as snapping a potato chip in half. Kind of like more like Pringles, like about the thickness of Pringles. It's like if you were to take a Pringle and snap it. But what's on the surface are living animals. Nah, more like Middlesworth kettle cooked, because it's a little thicker. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, the kettle cook's good. Middlesworth barbecue chips are where it's at. You know they have a, yeah. Yeah, it's a weekender for me. If a weekend's half an hour, just hit it. Yeah, and other coral we've got are like these chalice corals, because oftentimes it grows like a cup, like a chalice. This one's purple. This one we propagate a lot of. This is each of the green spots is a separate animal, a separate polyp, but their tissue connects to neighboring polyps with the like purple structure. And this one's called Julian Sprung's Hollywood Stunner Coral. That's the full name of it, but people just usually call it Stunner. And under fluorescent lights, the green glows pretty brightly, and it grows pretty quick. So all the time, coral have this basic structure, much like other cnidarians. So in the video, they mentioned that coral are related to jellyfish and anemone. Cnidarians are animals that live in the ocean. These coral are animals that have a general basic structure. There's a digestive sac or a gastrovascular cavity. This is where the food is taken in, digestion takes place, and waste comes right out through the mouth. Like anemones have tentacles. Anemones will oftentimes grab food and then force the food right into their mouths. Coral often have tentacles that will grab food from the water. But what's also present with coral is coral have plants, algae living within their cells. So within the cells of the animal are these algae called zooxanthellae. And zooxanthellae are algae that have been provided protection by the coral, but then excess energy produced by the zooxanthellae is food for the coral. So our coral require very bright and specialized lights to simulate the um, noonday sun in the tropics. The coral are sessile animals. They don't move around. Once a coral is on a place on a rock, it spends its entire life living right there. And an individual coral animal can live for a very long time, hundreds of years. The animal itself doesn't have a definitive lifespan, and the animal itself just splits to make other neighbors. It just splits asexually. So if there's a coral and it's living on a surface and it's got space beside it, it'll split itself in half. Its neighbor will go over there. So in a colony of coral, they are all perfect clones of each other. Coral also reproduce sexually, but that only happens a couple times a year, and that's not the major way that they end up reproducing. That's a whole other process that's exciting. This zooxanthellae algae takes carbon dioxide from the water and takes light from the sun and uses water in the water, obviously, to do photosynthesis. And excess sugars and lipids produced by the algae is food for the coral, and the coral get a home. And so it turns out that the color of the coral depends upon what kind of algae is living within the body of the coral. And then there's also, what do you call it? Like fluorescent pigments that exist in it. So a thing that happens in our aquariums, which is not good, it happens in the ocean, is bleaching. It has some other names too, but bleaching is this general phenomena when coral is under stress. The coral animal will leave the structure of the skeleton that it's living on. And because the coral polyps are all connected to each other, they can send chemical signals throughout the colony. So in this picture on the bottom, you see the left-hand side, there's a Acropora coral that is kind of brownish with purple tips, and that whole colony is alive. But then to the right-hand side, that whole colony that's that bright white, that whole colony has decided to leave. So what the animal will do is, if it's stressed because the pH is wrong, the temperature is wrong, something is physically attacking it, like biting at it, or there's an invading coral that's killing the colony, or disease spreads throughout the colony, all the polyps will all simultaneously, well, within a short period of time, all just leave. They'll just take off. And it's kind of a survival thing because if the colony is, I guess you could say, has decided this is not a suitable home and we're going to die here, they just take off and leave. And each individual polyp goes floating around the ocean. They can each land somewhere and then find a new home. And that actually happens in our aquariums. I'll have a coral that I didn't put into an aquarium, but because all of our aquariums that are in the hallway are interconnected to each other, I'll have coral in one aquarium just all of a sudden show up in another one because one of the polyps has come loose or it has bleached, and then the pumps pump it around throughout the system and they land other places. Sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that's a terrible thing. There's one kind of coral that we have that this is a close-up showing bleach coral on the right, non-bleached on the left, and that happens in our aquariums. And it's really sad. Sometimes a whole colony will bleach. There's one kind of coral that we propagate a lot here at school that leaves all the time to grow on new surfaces. And some people hate that it happens because it can show up on the walls of the tank. But there's a classic coral called Bacilla Por Coral. We have a lot of this green Bacilla Por that looks like this. In fact, I just fragged a whole bunch of this green Bacilla Por, and it's in the frag tank that's in the hallway. We also have this blue and purple, and I have this like bright purple that looks like this. And yeah, this is really typical of the color. The kind of green, it has like a little bit of kind of yellowish color toward the base. Oh, that's annoying. That one, hate when that happens. Because I like shut that one off, but that one saw it too. Anyway, And so like retail, you can see here, I don't know, where was it? So like, well, you wouldn't get a piece this big. This is the whole colony, but yet this company sells a small piece for $60. Typically pieces of coral are pretty expensive, but when I sell them at shows, they sell for like a lot less money, kind of as a hobbyist. Like here, there's 3 pieces of soft coral, just 3 little pieces, and it's $179. But we would sell these pieces for about $10 a piece, so for about $30 or so. There's like 3 small pieces of coral. These are collected from Tonga, and these 3 small pieces are like $130. So there's quite a lot of money in the coral business. And if you're good at growing coral and propagating it, you can sell it and do okay. Let me see, show you. I know that, let me think about what year it was. Here it is. I think it's the one that I'm in. So there's this company that sells lights called Kessel, and what they do is, yeah, well, actually we'll watch it on this one because then it's got some sound. So a little over a month from now, I got to take coral to sell at a show called Reefapalooza. It's one of the biggest shows, and I know I haven't shown you this video, and how this one company sells aquarium lighting, and they have this deal where they give lights to exhibitors to put on their tanks. They look like these at the show, and that way, there I am. That's me, and that's Frost. Frost is crazy. He's such a cool guy. But Frost, he lives in Ohio, and his whole gig is just traveling around the country selling coral. He's like one of the biggest like coral dealers. He just bought a new van. He put, I think he said 600,000 miles on a van in 4 years. So he drives like 125,000 miles a year, just driving around selling coral. There's nowhere in the country he won't go on any weekend. So in other words, like he'll leave his home in Ohio Friday, he'll drive to Washington State, do a show on Saturday, and back to Ohio. Next week, down to Florida, back to Ohio. There's nowhere he won't go for a show. He's done shows here, like at the high school. Anyway, so he buys a bunch of stuff from me too, because I sell stuff cheap and then he takes to other shows. Anyway, so these lights, the light manufacturer just gives us the lights. And that way, as people go around the show, they see that all the lights on all the tanks are from this company. And then everybody thinks like, oh, that must be what the coral growers are using to grow their lights or grow their coral. And then they all want to buy that brand. But in fact, we don't really use those lights because they're not that great. They're kind of expensive. People like waiting to get in.
It's John from Aquarium here. We're here at Reefapalooza. We love Palooza. We come every year. And we have Kessel lighting. We love Kessel lighting. We grow corals under it. It just shows them off well. Kessel rocks. How's it going? I'm Mike from Reefs. And we have our Kessel lights set up here. We love them because we're able to get our nice blues to pop up fluorescence on our reef racks that we have here. I love being at Reefapalooza. We get to see all our hobbyists and friends and have a good time.
My name's Jen. I am from Coral Reef Connection in Reading, Pennsylvania. We love Reefapalooza because what is there not to love about Reefapalooza? And we like to use the Kessels at our shows
possible for us to come and be a part of, bringing the reefing community together. And we appreciate Kessel shining the light on it and helping us to see the things that we all love so much.
Maybe this is, oh, here it is.
Reefapalooza is awesome. The people are good, the food's good, the corals are good. What more can we ask for?
Hey, I'm Larry Flint from Millionaire Coral. We're part of the Reef Conservation Society here at Reefapalooza. We're using Kessel lights on all of our aquariums today, and we grow a lot of our coral frags on Kessels. And Reefapalooza is awesome. We thank Kessel a lot for helping us out here at the show.
What's up? My name is Marty. I'm from
It's a light. It's a lie. We don't use Kessel. But they're like, yo, if you put them on your tanks and then say you love Kessel for the video, then you get to keep the lights. They're like, all right, like whatever.
Still have it?
Oh yeah, we have them in a bunch of tanks in the back, but I haven't had great luck growing the fragments out with them, and they're relatively expensive as compared to other lights that you can get coral to grow pretty well with. I do, but then I do, like they're kind of used. But then the other thing is I can buy them. I can actually buy them at wholesale. So yeah, sort of. Let me show you. Oh, hold on. Let me get to